A homeless girl reveals a secret at a millionaire's son's grave. But rate my story from 0 to 10 and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I appreciate your help. The weeping echoed through the cemetery like a blade slicing the afternoon silence. The widowed millionaire adjusted the collar of his Italian dress shirt and looked around, searching for the source of the disturbing sound. At 30, his movie star looks contrasted sharply with the deep pain etched in his blue eyes. For 3 weeks, he had visited the white marble tomb where his 4-year-old son rested, always at the same time, always with the same agony tearing at his chest. "Daddy's here, my little man," he murmured, kneeling before the gold-lettered headstone. His fortune, built on stock market investments, seemed insignificant in the face of the loss that consumed him. All his millions of dollars, his Bitcoin holdings, his multi-million-dollar deals, none of it mattered when he looked at that cold stone that held his greatest treasure. That's when he saw her for the first time. A frail girl, appearing to be only 2 years old due to her extreme fragility, emerged from behind an old mausoleum. Her brown hair was tangled, her ragged clothes barely covered her thin body, and her bare feet stepped delicately among the graves. But it was her eyes that struck him, large, dark, filled with a maturity impossible for her age. "Someone's crying down there," she said, pointing to the tomb with her raspy little voice. The businessman frowned, annoyed by the interruption. "Go away, kid. This is no place for games." "It's not a game," she insisted, moving closer. "I hear it. He's calling for his daddy." A shiver ran down the millionaire's spine. "What did you say?" "The boy is crying. He wants to get out." The little beggar pointed again to the tomb. "Needs a shovel." The man stood up abruptly, his heart pounding. "You don't know what you're talking about. My son is... he can't... but I hear it," she repeated with a disturbing determination. "Every time I come here, I hear him calling." "You come here other times?" His voice came out harsher than he intended. The girl nodded. "I sleep over there," she said, pointing to a corner of the cemetery where there was a large oak tree. "When it rains, I stay under the stone angels." The reality of the situation hit him like a punch. A 4-year-old child living alone in the cemetery. "Where are your parents?" "I don't have any." She sat on the ground next to the tomb, as if that was the most natural place in the world. "Mommy left me at the hospital and never came back." "It was a long time ago." The millionaire felt a pang in his chest. His obsessive tendency to focus on insignificant details when he was in crisis made him notice every aspect of the child. The way she moved her small fingers when talking, the way she tilted her head when listening, the way her eyes never blinked when she looked directly at him. "You can't stay here," he said, but his voice sounded less convincing. "Why not? It's quiet. And there's shade." She touched the headstone gently. "Your little boy has a pretty name engraved here." Tears almost welled up in the businessman's eyes. He had had engraved not only the name, but a phrase that summed up all his love. "Forever in Daddy's heart." "You can read?" "A little. The lady who gave me food near the square taught me some words before she left." The millionaire looked at the child sitting next to his son's grave, and a strange feeling took hold of him. It was as if 2 tragedies had met in that silent place, creating a connection that he could not understand. "What's your name?" "People call me lots of things, but I think my real name is written on a paper I lost." "And how old are you?" 4. "Just like your little boy." She smiled for the first time, a sweet smile that contrasted with all the sadness around. "That's why I understand when he cries. 4-year-olds cry when they're scared." The businessman felt his legs tremble. "He's not crying. He's at peace?" The girl tilted her head. "Then why the crying?" He had no answer. For 3 weeks, he had tried to find solace in those daily visits, but the pain only increased. And now an abandoned child appeared with words that shattered any attempt at acceptance. "I'm going now," she said, getting up and shaking the dirt off her clothes. "But I'll be back tomorrow. I always come back when I hear him crying." "Wait." The word came out before he could think. "Where are you going to sleep tonight?" "Wherever. I always manage." She started to walk away, but stopped and looked back. "You look very sad, just like the boy down there." The millionaire stood still, watching the little figure disappear among the trees of the cemetery. Her words echoed in his obsessive mind, creating a storm of doubts that he did not know how to face. For the first time since the funeral, he looked at the tomb and wondered if he really knew the whole truth about what had happened to his son. When he got home, his stepmother was waiting in the luxurious living room with that fake smile that he knew so well. At 50, she maintained a calculated elegance, always wearing expensive clothes that highlighted her artificial beauty. "How was your visit to the cemetery today, dear?" she asked, without looking up from the magazine she was flipping through. "Normal," he lied, heading straight to the study. "You've been visiting that place a lot. Don't you think it's time to move on?" He stopped at the door, feeling the familiar irritation rise. "He was my son." Was. Past tense. She finally looked at him. "You're young, you have a considerable fortune, a whole future ahead of you. This obsession is not healthy." The businessman did not respond, but the beggar girl's words returned to his mind. 4-year-olds cry when they're scared. He closed the study door and sat down at the mahogany desk, staring at the family photo where he appeared smiling next to his son. For the first time, he allowed himself to question if there was something he didn't know about that terrible night at the hospital. 2 weeks had passed since the first meeting, and the businessman couldn't get the girl's words out of his head. His obsessive tendency to focus on details had intensified, making each visit to the cemetery a mental torture. She always appeared, always at the same time, always repeating the same disturbing phrases about the cries that only she could hear. "Did you bring the shovel today?" she asked on that rainy afternoon, emerging like a ghost between the wet tombstones. "There's no shovel that can fix this," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "My son is at peace." "Then why do you come here crying every day?" The child's question hit him like a stone. "And why are your eyes red when you leave?" The millionaire looked at her more closely. During those 2 weeks, he had noticed that the girl was thinner, her clothes dirtier, and there was a dry cough that constantly accompanied her. "You're sick, just a little." "Rain is bad for those who sleep on the ground." She approached the tomb and placed her small hand on the cold marble. "But he's worse. He cries harder when it rains." "Stop it!" The explosion came without warning, a result of weeks of accumulated pressure. "Stop saying those things. He's not crying because he can't cry." The child was not startled by the scream. Instead, her large eyes filled with a compassion that seemed impossible for her age. "You're more scared than he is." That simple sentence destroyed all the businessman's defenses. He knelt before the girl, his hands trembling. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing. I just want to help." She touched his face with her dirty little hand. "My mum used to say that when someone is lost, we need to show them the way. Your mother abandoned you, but she loved me before that, and she taught me important things." The girl coughed, a deep cough that made the businessman worry. "She said that a child who cries a lot is a child who needs their daddy." That night, the millionaire arrived home more disturbed than ever. His stepmother was waiting in the living room, but this time she wasn't alone. A man in a grey suit with a leather briefcase was sitting next to her. "Oh, good, you're here," said the stepmother with a venomous smile. "This is Dr. Henry Oliveira, a psychiatrist. I told him about your current situation." The businessman felt his blood boil. "What situation?" "Your obsessive visits to the cemetery, the conversations with imaginary children, the deterioration of your emotional state." She stood up like a predator circling her prey. "I'm worried about you, dear." "The child is not imaginary." Dr. Oliveira spoke for the first time. "Sir, it is common for people in mourning to develop hallucinations as a defense mechanism. The important thing is to recognize and treat it." "I'm not hallucinating!" The scream echoed through the mansion. She exists. She lives in the cemetery. The stepmother exchanged a meaningful look with the doctor. See? That's exactly what worries me. A child living alone in a cemetery that doesn't exist in real life. The businessman realized the trap that was being set. His stepmother, who had always despised his marriage and the existence of his grandson, now saw a golden opportunity to take control of his fortune. "You're not going to commit me." "No one said anything about commitment," said Dr. Oliveira in a calm voice. "Just a few therapy sessions and perhaps some medication to help with the anxiety. And who will take care of your business while you recover?" The stepmother couldn't completely hide her true intentions. "Someone needs to manage your investments, your holdings, all this wealth you've built." The businessman left the room without responding, locking himself in his study. For the first time, he understood that he was fighting two battles. One against his own doubts about his son, and another against the greed of those who should protect him. The next day, he arrived at the cemetery earlier than normal, and found the girl lying under the tree, trembling with fever. Her cough had worsened, and she could barely keep her eyes open. "You need a doctor," he said, kneeling beside her. "Doctors cost money. I don't have money." "I do." The words came out before he could think. "I have a lot of money. Rich doctors don't like dirty kids." The brutal simplicity of that observation hit him hard. Here was a 4-year-old child who had already learned about the injustices of the world, about how capital determined who deserved care and who should die in invisibility. "I'm going to take you home," he decided. "Your house?" Her eyes lit up with a mixture of hope and disbelief. "My house. I'm going to take care of you." When he picked her up, the girl weighed almost nothing. It was like carrying a wounded bird. During the way to the mansion, she dozed off in his arms, and he could feel the fever burning through her wet clothes. "Is my name important?" she murmured, half asleep. "Very important. Then I'll remember. I think it starts with L." Upon arriving home, the businessman faced the stepmother's fury. "You brought a beggar into our house? Have you completely lost your mind? She's a sick child. She's a stranger. You don't know anything about her." The woman blocked the passage to the stairs. "She may have diseases. She may be dangerous. She's 4 years old, and you're obsessed with her because she's 4 years old." The stepmother finally revealed part of her thoughts. "You're trying to replace your dead son with a street child." The businessman carried the girl upstairs, ignoring the stepmother's screams. In the guest room, he put her in bed and called the family doctor. While waiting, he watched the child sleep, noticing for the first time details he had missed: a small scar on her chin, the delicate shape of her hands, the way she held the sheet even while sleeping. Dr. Carter arrived an hour later and examined the girl carefully. Early pneumonia, severe malnutrition, signs of prolonged exposure to cold and dampness. A few more days on the street and... But will she be okay? With proper care, yes. She's a fighter. The doctor looked at the businessman with curiosity. "May I ask what your relationship is to the child?" "I'm still figuring it out." That night, the girl woke up with a high fever and began to hallucinate. Among incomprehensible murmurs, she always repeated the same phrase: "The boy is calling for his daddy. The boy wants to get out." The businessman stayed by the bed all night, cooling her forehead with damp cloths. As the hours passed, a strange certainty grew in his chest. That child had not appeared in his life by chance. There was some connection between her and his son, some truth that he could not yet understand. When dawn finally arrived, the fever had subsided, and the girl opened her eyes. For the first time since they had met, she smiled at him. A genuine smile, full of gratitude. "Thank you for saving me," she said in a hoarse voice. "You saved me," he replied, without completely understanding what those words meant. But in the living room, his stepmother was already on the phone with Dr. Oliveira, reporting the latest events and accelerating her plans to take control of the situation. The war was just beginning, and the businessman still didn't know that his decision to help an abandoned child would become the evidence his enemies needed to destroy him completely. 3 months had passed since the girl had arrived at the mansion, and her physical recovery had been impressive. Mrs. Davison, the 60-year-old housekeeper who had taken care of the family for decades, had become attached to the child as if she were her own granddaughter. She was the one who combed her now shining brown hair, who prepared nutritious meals, and who read stories before bed. "She's special, sir," Mrs. Davison told the businessman. "There's a light in her eyes that I've never seen in such a young child." The girl, who had chosen to be called Lily after discovering that her real name started with L, demonstrated a surprising intelligence. She learned to read with astonishing speed, asked complex questions about the world around her, and maintained a detailed memory of everything she saw and heard. But her words about the cemetery had not changed. "The crying was louder today," she said on a rainy afternoon, returning from the porch where she had been looking towards the cemetery. "I think he knows you haven't been going there." The businessman had stopped making daily visits on the advice of Dr. Oliveira and the constant pressure from his stepmother. "Lily, we've talked about this. You need to stop talking about these things." "But it's true." She approached him, her large eyes full of certainty. "Want me to draw what I hear?" Before he could answer, she had already grabbed paper and pencil, beginning to draw with disturbing precision. The drawing showed the cemetery seen from above, with the specific tomb marked, and wavy lines coming out of it towards other points on the grounds. "These lines are the sounds," she explained. "They come from below and travel here," she said, tracing a path with her finger. "That's why I could hear even when I was far away." The businessman studied the drawing, his obsessive mind cataloguing every detail. There was something in those lines that bothered him, a logic that he could not understand, but that seemed strangely plausible. At that moment, the stepmother entered the room, accompanied by 2 people he did not know, a middle-aged woman in formal clothes and a man carrying an official briefcase. "We need to talk," said the stepmother with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "This is Dr. Marcia Santos, a social worker, and Mr. Roberto from Child Protective Services." Lily hid behind the businessman, instinctively sensing danger. "We received an anonymous report about a child living in an irregular situation," said the social worker. "A minor without documentation, taken off the streets without going through the appropriate channels." The businessman felt the ground collapse beneath his feet. "I saved her. She was sick, abandoned." "We understand your good intention," continued the man from Child Protective Services, "but there are protocols. The child needs to be evaluated and her situation regularized." "You mean you're going to take her away?" "Temporarily, until we resolve the legal issue." The stepmother could not completely hide her satisfaction. "It's for her own good." Lily grabbed the businessman's shirt tightly. "I don't want to go. Please don't let them take me." The child's plea broke his heart, but the official documents were clear. As Lily was taken away, crying and reaching out to him, the businessman felt a fury grow in his chest that he had not experienced since the loss of his son. "This was you," he said to the stepmother when they were alone. "It was necessary. You've completely lost control." She poured herself a glass of expensive wine. "An undocumented child, fanciful stories about cemeteries, impulsive decisions involving your fortune. The doctors agree that you need help." "What doctors?" "Dr. Oliveira already has a preliminary assessment. With Lily out of the picture, you can focus on your recovery." The businessman went up to the room where Lily had slept for the last 3 months. Her clothes were still in the closet, her drawings scattered on the table, the sweet scent of her presence still lingering in the air. On the bed, she had left the last drawing she had made, the cemetery with the wavy lines, but this time with a disturbing addition. She had drawn a small figure underground, and next to it, in her childish but neat handwriting, she had written, He's cold. That night, against all medical recommendations and orders from his stepmother, the businessman returned to the cemetery. He had not been there for 2 months, and the place seemed different, darker, as if something had changed in the atmosphere. He knelt before his son's tomb, and for the first time allowed himself to really listen. Initially, there was only the typical silence of the night. But then, almost imperceptibly, he heard something that made his blood run cold, a muffled, rhythmic sound coming from somewhere below him. "My God," he murmured, putting his ear to the cold ground. The sound was weak but unmistakable. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't his imagination. It was a pattern, almost like breathing. With trembling hands, he took out his cell phone and called Dr. Carter, the doctor who had taken care of Lily. "Doctor, I need you to tell me something about my son. At the hospital, when you said he had passed away, did you do all the tests?" "Sir, it's 3 in the morning. Please, it's important." There was a long pause. "Well, your son's case was complicated. He had been in a deep coma for weeks. The vital signs were extremely weak. But they were present? Technically, yes. But the prognosis was irreversible. Dr. Almeida, who was responsible for the case, made the decision based on his experience." "Dr. Almeida, does he still work at the hospital?" "No. He retired suddenly shortly after your case. Moved to upstate, I believe." The businessman hung up the phone, his heart pounding erratically. For the first time, Lily's words made a terrible sense. What if the diagnosis had been rushed? What if his son was still... Back at the mansion, he found Mrs. Davison waiting in the kitchen with a cup of tea. "You shouldn't have gone there alone," she said with maternal concern. "Mrs. Davison, I need to tell you something, and I need you to help me." He sat down at the table, his hands still trembling. "I think I made a terrible mistake. I think my son may still be..." "I know," she interrupted quietly. "How do you know?" Mrs. Davison got up and went to an old cabinet, from which she took a dusty shoebox. "I found this last week when I was organizing the attic." Inside the box were medical documents, X-rays, and exams that he had never seen. The data was different from what was in the official records he possessed. The recorded vital signs showed brain activity, weak but present breathing, irregular but existing heartbeats. "Why didn't you show me this before?" "Because I knew you were going to go crazy. And because..." She hesitated. "Because your stepmother told me it was best not to mess with these things." The businessman studied the documents with growing horror. There was a signature that he did not recognize on the death certificate, and stamps from a clinic that he had never heard of. "Mrs. Davison, where exactly did you find this?" "In your wife's old room, stored with her things that your stepmother said not to touch." The realization hit the businessman like lightning. His stepmother had been involved from the beginning. She had had access to the medical documents, had influenced the hospital's decisions, and was now trying to distance him from any chance of discovering the truth. He looked out the window towards the cemetery, and for the first time in months, Lily's words did not seem like the fantasy of a traumatized child. They seemed like the only truth that anyone had told him in years. He pulled out his cell phone and called the only lawyer he still trusted. "Maurice, I need your urgent help, and I need you to get me the best investigators you can." "Investigate what?" "My son's death, and I need you to find Lily before they do something to her." From upstairs, hidden behind the door of her room, the stepmother listened to every word with a cold smile on her lips. She picked up the phone and dialed a familiar number. "Dr. Almeida, it's me. I think we have a problem. The investigation that the businessman hired revealed horrors that not even his obsessive mind could have imagined. In just 2 weeks, the investigators discovered a network of corruption in the hospital that involved false death certificates for patients in critical condition, allowing them to be transferred to an experimental clinic on the outskirts of the city. "Sir, what I'm about to show you will shock you," said Morris, the lawyer, handing over a folder full of documents. Dr. Almeida did not retire. He was transferred to run this clandestine clinic that conducts research with patients in comas. The businessman read the reports with growing nausea. Dozens of children and adults had been given up as lost when they still had minimal vital signs, all transferred to this clinic where they were kept on experimental equipment under the guise of advanced medical research. And my son, he's there, alive, but in a vegetative state for almost a year. The revelation knocked him down in the chair, an entire year crying over an empty grave while his son was being used as a guinea pig in medical experiments. How was this possible? Your stepmother signed the transfer documents as the legal guardian. She received a substantial amount of money to allow your son to be used in the research. The businessman felt a murderous fury grow in his chest. His stepmother had literally sold the life of her stepson for money, condemning him to prolonged suffering and taking away from his father the chance to fight for his recovery. Where is Lily now? She was taken to an orphanage in the next town. But, sir, Maurice hesitated. She ran away. She's been missing for 3 days. That same afternoon, the businessman drove to the clandestine clinic, accompanied by the appropriate authorities. The place was an old building disguised as a nursing home, located in an isolated rural area. When the doors were broken down, what they found was a chamber of medical horrors. Dozens of patients in induced comas, connected to experimental machines, kept alive only to serve as study material. In the last room of the main corridor, he found his son. The child was pale, thinner but breathing. Tubes and wires connected his small body to equipment that monitored every vital function. There were needle marks on his arms, evidence of the countless experimental procedures he had undergone. "Daddy's here, my little man," whispered the businessman, holding his son's cold little hand. "Daddy's going to take you home." Dr. Almeida was found trying to destroy documents in his office. When confronted, he confessed that the clinic had been operating for 5 years, always with the complicity of corrupt employees of the region's hospitals. The stepmother had been one of the most lucrative collaborators, providing patients in exchange for substantial percentages of the research funds. "She told me you would never find out," said Dr. Almeida during the interrogation, "that you were too devastated to question the medical procedures." Meanwhile, in the mansion, the stepmother was packing frantically when Mrs. Davison surprised her. "Running away, Ma'am?" "Going on vacation," lied the stepmother, but her hands were trembling as she folded the clothes. "Mrs. Davison found more documents," said the housekeeper, showing a second box that she had hidden for months. "Contracts signed by you, bank transfers, even photographs of the clinic." The stepmother stared at the woman she considered just an employee. "You don't understand anything about this situation. I understand that you sold an innocent child for money. I understand that you made a father suffer for an entire year thinking he had lost his only son." Mrs. Davison straightened up, showing a dignity that came from decades of caring for that family. "And I understand that if the little one hadn't appeared with her special ears, you would never have discovered the truth." At that moment, a familiar figure appeared in the kitchen door. Lily was dirty, tired, but smiling from ear to ear. "Grandma Davison, I did it! Lily, how did you get here?" Mrs. Davison ran to hug the girl. "I ran away from the bad place where they put me. I walked for 3 days to get here." She looked at the stepmother with a disturbing seriousness. "I came to tell you that they found the boy. He was where I said he was." The stepmother paled. "That's impossible. You're just a child." "I'm a child who hears things that adults can't." Lily approached her without fear. "The sound came through the pipes under the ground, the pipes that connect the clinic with the cemetery. That's why I heard the boy crying." The explanation was so simple that it was ingenious. The underground ventilation system of the clandestine clinic was connected to the old ducts that passed under the cemetery. The crying of the businessman's son, amplified by the metal pipes, reached the surface, where only ears trained by the need for survival on the streets could detect it. "You knew this all along," accused Lily, pointing to the stepmother. "You knew he was alive and let his daddy cry over an empty hole." 2 hours later, the businessman arrived home carrying his son in his arms. The child was still unconscious, but the doctors at the public hospital assured him that, away from the clinic's experiments, he had a real chance of recovery. Lily ran to him, her eyes shining with happiness. "I said he was crying. I said he wanted to get out." "You said, and you were right." The businessman knelt down, balancing his son in one arm and hugging Lily with the other. "You saved my family." "Are we a real family now?" she asked, with all the hope that a 4-year-old can carry. "We are. You, me, and him. A real family." Mrs. Davison watched the scene with tears in her eyes as the police sirens faded away, taking the stepmother to face the consequences of her crimes. 6 months later, the businessman's son had woken up from the coma. His recovery was slow but steady, and the doctors considered it a miracle that he had kept most of his brain functions intact, despite the months of experiments. Lily, now officially adopted, had become the most protective sister any child could have. She read stories to him, sang the songs she had learned from her biological mother, and was always there when he needed courage for his physical therapy exercises. "Why could you hear me when no one else could?" asked the boy on a sunny afternoon while they were playing in the mansion's garden. "Because those who have gone hungry hear better. Those who have slept on the streets pay more attention to the sounds." Lily replied with the wisdom of someone who had learned too early about the cruelty and the kindness of the world. "And because you needed someone who believed that you were still there." The businessman watched his 2 children playing and thought about how life had changed. His fortune, his investments, his Bitcoin holdings, and stock market investments, none of it had mattered when it came to saving those he loved. But an abandoned girl, with no assets beyond her courage and her ability to hear what others ignored, had managed to do what all his money could not: give him back hope. Mrs. Davison approached with a tray of snacks, smiling as she saw the family reunited. "You know what I think, sir," she said, tidying Lily's hair with maternal affection. "I think some people are born with a special gift for finding those who are lost. And some people need to get completely lost to find what really matters," replied the businessman, embracing his 2 children. That night, for the first time in over a year, he did not dream of cemeteries or cries coming from impossible places. He dreamed of the future he was building, a family reunion where love had overcome greed, where truth had triumphed over lies, and where an abandoned girl had become the angel who saved not only one life, but an entire family that thought it was lost forever. The tomb in the cemetery remained empty, but now it was just that. An empty place, without the power to hurt, without buried secrets. The real life was happening in the mansion, where 3 people that destiny had brought together learned daily that family is not who you are born with, but who you choose to stay with in the most difficult moments.